Jumatatu mpaka Ijumaa, moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili.
Hello, I'm Esther Gidhui-Ewart. This is Africa 54, and here's what's coming up.
Adopt a political declaration that brings hope to developing countries amid concerns that their development goals aren't on track. The United Nations says more than 1,200 children have died of suspected measles and malnutrition in Sudan refugee camps due to the ongoing conflict. And the International Rescue Committee is in Libya providing relief efforts to victims of the flood that swept away entire neighborhoods in parts of the country. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54.
U.S. President Joe Biden addressed world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly in New York on Tuesday. He appealed to them to stand with Ukraine against Russian invaders and to stand with democracy. The president also spoke about the need to partner and invest in the infrastructure of low and middle-income countries, especially on the continent.
And we're working to show how democracy can deliver in ways that matter to people's lives. The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment addresses the enormous need and opportunity for infrastructure investment in low and middle income countries, particularly in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Through strategic, targeted public investments, we can unlock enormous amounts of private sector financing. The G7 has pledged to work with parties to collectively mobilize $600 billion in infrastructure financing by 2027. The United States has already mobilized more than $30 billion to date. We're creating a race to the top with projects that have high standards for workers, the environment, and intellectual property while avoiding the trap of unsustainable debt. We're focusing on economic corridors that will maximize the impact of our collective investment and deliver consequential results across multiple countries and multiple sectors. For example, the Libido corridor will extend across Africa from the western port of Angola to the DRC to Zambia, boosting regional connectivity and strengthening commerce and food security in Africa.
UN officials are playing down the fact that the leaders of the other permanent members of the Security Council, Britain, France, Russia, and China, are not in New York this week. President Biden is scheduled to host talks Thursday at the White House with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Amid concerns that their sustainable development goals are off track, world leaders at the UN General Assembly have adopted a political declaration that brings hope to developing countries. Veronica Balderas Iglesias has the details.
On a rainy day in New York City, a somber reminder at the United Nations General Assembly of how world leaders are behind schedule in meeting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals they adopted in 2015 and hoped to achieve by 2030.
Despite commitments to eradicate poverty and to reduce hunger being at the core of this agenda, alarmingly, 1.2 billion people were still living in multidimensional poverty as of 2022. It is estimated that approximately 8% of global population, or 680 million people, will still be facing hunger in 2030.
Young leaders also raised concerns about the lack of progress toward the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, demanding action to combat climate change and concrete solutions to empower their generation.
68 million young people are looking for jobs. All over the world, millions of young people are unable to access social protection coverage. Mental health problems like depression and anxiety are a serious concern for young people.
World leaders did manage to adopt on Monday a political declaration that brings a ray of hope to struggling economies.
This includes clear support for an SDG stimulus of at least $500 billion a year, as well as an effective debt relief mechanism that supports payment suspensions, longer lending terms, and lower rates.
Guterres said countries can help get the SDGs back on track by paying attention to 6 targeted areas, including relieving hunger, ensuring gender equality, and improving education.
Our proposed Global Digital Compact will also help countries build safe digital systems that provide internet access for all, including students in hard-to-reach communities.
Guterres highlighted another initiative that aims to create 400 million new jobs, especially in the green, care, and digital sectors. He also emphasized that countries must act now to rescue the SDGs.
For more on the UNGA, I'm joined live from UN headquarters by VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias. Veronica, give us more of the highlights of President Biden's speech earlier today.
Good morning, Esther. Yes, well, he highlighted the importance of having a united front to denounce this invasion of Ukraine by Russia. He said it is very important to provide more international support. On the other hand, he also mentioned that the U.S. is fostering different partnerships around the world, including in Africa, to bring about more economic opportunities. He also mentioned the importance of reforms to international institutions to make them more inclusive, Esther.
So which African presidents are scheduled to speak later today, and what more has been said about Africa's participation at this General Assembly meeting?
Well, we have, for instance, South Africa, we have Senegal, Nigeria. They will be speaking about issues like inflation, like hunger, as well as climate change. We must remember that at the beginning of September, we had the first African Climate Summit, and so that is going to be one of the topics that will be highlighted. Also, the African coups are in the agenda already. The President of the General Assembly, Dennis Francis, was mentioning the importance of finding those root causes, analyzing them, and addressing them.
Veronica, there have been dual crises in Morocco and Libya. Has this been mentioned so far at the Assembly?
Yes, as well, Dennis Francis was offering condolences to the people that were affected and emphasizing again the need to provide relief and help those vulnerable communities that are facing the devastating effects of climate change with some infrastructure that will help mitigate those effects and also to adapt to this changing climate, Esther.
Veronica, we heard a young woman speak about the youth agenda. What more are we expected to hear as the week moves on and more topics are discussed at the UN General Assembly?
I think one of the most important voices we are hearing so far are those of the youth. They were talking about the problems with mental health, with depression. They feel they are being left behind in these talks. They are trying to hold these important leaders accountable, asking them they have to meet these sustainable development goals by 2030, but they are not on track. And so they want to be included in the conversation. And especially, again, climate change is a big topic. They want to be able to find solutions together with these important leaders, Esther.
Veronica, many thanks for your reporting. Veronica Balderas Iglesias, reporting live for us at the UN headquarters in New York. A week after the flood that swept the city center of Derna into the sea, Libyans gathered outside the Al-Sahaba Mosque in protest against the government. Video shows crowds of people chanting and holding banners outside the mosque. Dams above the city ruptured in a storm, sending a massive wave of water down a riverbed that runs through the city of 120,000 people. Thousands are dead and thousands more are still missing. The United Nations says more than 1,200 children have died of suspected measles and malnutrition in Sudanese refugee camps, while thousands more, including newborns, are at risk of dying before the end of the year. According to aid agencies, nearly 6 months into a conflict between Sudan's army and paramilitary rapid support forces, the country's healthcare sector is crumbling due to direct attacks from the warring parties, as well as shortages of staff and medicines. Dr. Alan Miner, chief of the public health at the UN Refugee Agency, spoke about the ongoing situation.
More than 1,200 refugee children under 5 have died in 9 camps in the period between 15th May and 14th September. This is due to a combination of a suspected measles outbreak and high malnutrition. Over 3,000 suspected cases of measles have been reported in this same period. And also we've seen more than 500 suspected cases of cholera in other parts of the country. This is compounding a situation where we're also seeing dengue, malaria, in a context that has increased epidemic risk and challenges for epidemic control.
Every month, more than 50,000 children require treatment for the worst form of malnutrition in Sudan, but fewer than 1 in 50 nutritional centers are functional in the Khartoum capital and 1 in 10 in West Darfur, according to Dr. Miner. Sierra Leonean President Julius Maada Bio says he plans to consolidate and expand on the success of his administration in his second term. In an exclusive interview with VOA, the president outlined what he says has been his administration's achievements, including free primary education for all citizens. VOA's Peter Clotty spoke with Mr. Bio about his vision and concerns about the recent elections.
Last time we worked on human capital development as the flagship program of our government. We got disrupted right from the onset with the advent of COVID and, of course, the many shocks that we've had, exogenous shocks that have affected our economy and every other thing within the country. So what we want to do, or what I want to do for the second term, is to consolidate the gains of the past 5 years, but also my program for the second term is going to be informed by most of the challenges we've had to go through as a result of COVID-19, as a result of the crises, multiple crises that have shaped definitely the way we should do business. We had adopted a policy of radical inclusion. Radical inclusion means every child must have the means to go to school. We have removed all barriers, we have made provision, and we are catering to the needs of all the kids in Sierra Leone so that everybody, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever your gender is, your political inclination, you have the means to go to school. And that is beginning to pay very, very well. The dividends are good and coming much earlier than I particularly expected.
You just won election. The opposition has boycotted all form of governance. They don't even want to go to parliament. They said there has to be a dialogue to resolve their concerns because they said the elections were rigged. They are calling on the Electoral Commission to release results, but they said they are disputing your victory. Now, as somebody who was declared the winner of the just recent elections, what is your response to their criticisms that no, the elections were rigged to make sure that you retain or come back to power? You have been sworn in as the president of Sierra Leone, where they are still disputing your victory. Your response to that?
The authority mandated by our constitution is the National Electoral Commission that declares the election victory. Mm-hmm. That has always been the case. And they are asking for a different thing today. They believe that the international community should come and declare who has won the election. The election was conducted in a free, fair, and transparent manner. But elections everywhere have never been without disputes. These are highly contentious issues everywhere in the world, including in the United States here. So if we have any problem, we all know that the courts are the best place to go. They have refused to go to the court because they don't have no locus. They don't have anything to present to the courts. Why are they going elsewhere and talking? Go to the courts. That was what I did when they said I lost the election. They rigged the 2012 election. Counting was still ongoing when they declared the election. And when we asked them, they said, go to the police. We have not rigged the election. It was declared. I was declared the winner.
That was Sierra Leonean President Julius Maada Bio speaking to VOA's Peter Claudy. Still to come, the UN issues a warning about the potential for disease outbreaks in the flood-stricken Libya city of Derna. We'll be right back.
This week on Straight Talk Africa, leaders from over 150 countries are gathering in New York for the annual United Nations General Assembly. This year, the war in Ukraine and climate change are expected to monopolize conversations. What is the status of the Sustainable Development Goals? Join me, Haiti Adams, and my guests for analysis on the next Straight Talk Africa.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
In other news, United Nations experts say war crimes and crimes against humanity continue being committed in Ethiopia almost a year after government and regional forces from Tigray agreed to end the fighting. Mohamed Chande Othman, the chair of the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, says agreement has not resolved the conflict in the north of the country, particularly in Tigray. The Italian cabinet has approved new measures to crack down on migration. That move comes after the southern island of Lampedusa was again overwhelmed last week by a wave of arrivals from Tunisia. The cabinet measures approved Monday focuses on migrants who don't qualify for asylum and are slated to be repatriated to their home countries. Italy's government has passed measures to build new migrant detention centers and allow for the rapid deportation of failed asylum seekers. Italy is facing another surge in migrant arrivals on the small island of Lampedusa. Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
In the past week, almost 10,000 migrants have landed on the tiny Italian island of Lampedusa. Most have crossed the Mediterranean on small boats from Tunisia.
We sleep in the open air, in the sun and in the cold. There is no food, and there are children.
The European Commission President joined Italy's Prime Minister on a visit to Lampedusa Sunday and promised a tough response.
We will decide who comes to the European Union and under what circumstances, and not the smugglers and traffickers.
Von der Leyen outlined a 10-point plan, including a bigger role for the bloc's border agency, Frontex, in identifying and repatriating migrants who don't qualify for asylum.
When it comes to substantive points and contents of things that the Commission can do, or the European Union even can do about this problem, there is absolutely nothing new.
Italy's Prime Minister pledged to build more detention centres and said the migrants must be stopped at source.
with a European mission, including a naval one if necessary, in agreement with the North African authorities to stop the departure of the boats. Assess in Africa who is or is not entitled to asylum, and accept in Europe only those who actually have the right, according to international conventions.
The European Union signed a strategic partnership with Tunisia in July, worth $1.1 billion, in return for a crackdown on human traffickers and tightened border controls. Human rights groups have expressed concerns over Tunisia's treatment of refugees and say Europe must offer a more humane response.
You don't stop them by putting up walls. You don't stop them by closing borders or with naval blockades. Welcoming them is the best answer you can give.
EU member states are struggling to agree on a new migration pact. Several Eastern European countries are refusing to accept refugee quotas to share the burden of the frontline states like Italy.
If we don't agree on something beyond that, then we will basically damage our own project. And that's going to be, in my view, particularly visible after the elections in 2024.
With those European elections scheduled for June, analysts say right-wing populist parties are looking to capitalise on voter discontent over Europe's handling of migration. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
It's time for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with a disease warning in Libya. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. Hello, everyone. The UN has issued a warning about the potential for disease outbreaks in the flood-stricken Libyan city of Derna. The flash floods that occurred on September 10th caused significant damage and left over 30,000 residents in need of basic necessities such as clean water and food. The bursting of 2 river dams resulted in a tidal wave that destroyed residential areas and raised concerns about contaminated water and sanitation issues. Relief workers say there is a severe lack of medical supplies in areas affected by floods. Additionally, transportation is still difficult due to the damaged roads that have not been fully fixed.
There is a shortage of drugs, especially drugs for chronic diseases, such as hypertension and diabetes, and drugs for children. We also lack drugs for fever and inflammation. At first, most roads were cut off due to the flood, so it was difficult for relief supplies to reach the disaster-stricken areas. But now the situation has improved to a certain extent, and some sections have undergone simple maintenance. But we still need to rebuild some infrastructure to ensure that supplies can be better transported to the disaster-hit areas.
The International Rescue Committee is on the ground in Libya providing relief efforts to victims of the flood that swept away entire neighborhoods in parts of the country. I spoke to Ciaran Donnelly, Senior Vice President for Crisis Response, Recovery and Development with the IRC, to find out more.
Libya was struck by a significant storm. Torrential downpours of rain led to significant flooding, including most devastatingly in the city of Derna, where two dams burst and a huge flood of water flowed into the city and washed away significant chunks of the neighborhood. So in Derna itself, there are thousands of people who've been confirmed as killed, thousands more who are missing, many of whom are also feared dead. Tens of thousands of people have been displaced and have lost their homes and livelihoods. Communities have been destroyed. There's also been destruction and devastation in other parts of Libya. The International Rescue Committee has 180 staff working in different parts of the country. We work in a town called Shahat, which is to the west of Derna. We have a health program operating there. Our staff there have been affected. Thankfully, our staff are safe, but many of their families have been affected. We've been responding and supporting the Ministry of Health in Shahat, but also we're able to send a team to assess the damage in Derna.
What are some of the issues that people are facing on the ground?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, it's a very chaotic and fast-moving situation on the ground. People are moving out of the affected areas, seeking safety, seeking refuge. The immediate priorities are medical assistance, making sure people are taken care of, treating the survivors. Many of the health facilities in those areas have themselves been damaged and destroyed. lost their stocks of pharmaceutical supplies, other equipment. So getting doctors and nurses into the area, we've been transporting Ministry of Health staff to affected areas, getting pharmaceutical supplies, medical equipment in, but also the basic relief items that people need. People need cooking utensils, blankets, they've lost everything. So first priority, help the survivors, help the living, help those who need immediate assistance. But there's a larger recovery effort that's going to be needed, as I said, in Derna in particular, and other areas. Huge amounts of infrastructure have been destroyed, and there's going to need to be a reconstruction effort there. All of this is compounded by the reality that Libya has experienced over a decade of conflict and political instability. The country is currently essentially divided with two competing administrations governing the eastern and western parts of the country. And so social services, public services, maintenance of public infrastructure are all things that have suffered and have been in decline in recent years. So the starting point for many of these affected communities was at quite a low baseline.
Given the current and possible future impact of the flood, how can issues such as waterborne diseases be prevented?
Yeah, I want to pick up on the public health threat from waterborne diseases in particular. And again, in Derna, where they suffered the worst devastation, we're really worried about the risk of, as you say, cholera and other diseases emerging. Not only has the water supply infrastructure itself been destroyed, but there's significant contamination from sewage systems that have been damaged, from waste facilities, from fuel from vehicles and petrol gas stations that have been damaged. So water, to the extent that is available, is certainly not safe and puts people at risk, and that risk only grows over time. So the immediate need is in water tanking, new water facilities. Water purification is something that we're exploring with some partners as to how we might be able to, at scale, support Libyan authorities, Libyan communities to purify water at scale. When it comes to future developments, how do we protect against something like this happening again? Obviously, in this particular instance, the bulk of the devastation was occurred by the failure of two dams. So ensuring adequate maintenance to public infrastructure is critical, but so too is predicting the impacts of future extreme weather events. We know that with the climate crisis, extreme weather events, torrential downpours and floods are likely to be more frequent. And so infrastructure that was developed decades ago in many cases isn't fit for purpose, even when it is well maintained, which it often isn't in many countries, when it comes to the threats they're likely to face. So predicting or projecting forward, estimating as best we can the likelihood of extreme weather events and ensuring that construction standards in the reconstruction effort in Derna and elsewhere in Libya take that into account is going to be critical to protecting communities in the future.
That's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on X, formerly Twitter, at Linor Moudou. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Moudou's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.